Okay, well, in honor of the time pressure there, I had about 5 cups of coffee, and so if I talk a little bit too fast, then at least we'll get through it quickly, and my apologies. So, all right, I'll try not to get quite that fast. First of all, just curious, how many people here have a pretty good idea of where the phrase monsters from the id came from? There's got to be a few of you in the audience. It's okay, I see a few hands. I won't do a guessing game here, but you'll see tribute to a movie that actually comes up a number of times, and as I was thinking about what to talk about here and how to do that. I'll be talking about the process of coming up with ideas, and this is a bit of a change of pace from some of the earlier sessions this morning. Even though they touched on a lot of similar stuff, we're all really mining the same area here, but this is much more of a how-to, how to come up with ideas, how to conduct brainstorming, and just a compilation of tricks and tips I've learned over the years. But just to give you a better example of where I'm coming from and you know, some background, very briefly, I really am a hardcore games person. Started back in 1980 when it really wasn't even an industry. And because of that, I've seen a huge amount of changes. I began, as we all did then, as a programmer because you basically had to twiddle the bits yourself. And you know, I won't get into the boring statistics about how incredibly small and cramped and slow the machines were, but it's just been a liberating experience to see them change. You know, in all the times that I've made games, one of the things that hasn't changed is the creative process, and I found that to be reassuring in a lot of ways. So let me talk a little bit about what I've done, and then we'll get right to business here. A few of the games, the better-known early games I worked on, Sinistar, an old arcade game, PHM Pegasus, which was a early naval simulation for LucasArts. Also, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis were both adventure games that I co-designed at LucasArts. And then in the last 12 years or so, I've been working as a freelancer, primarily working as a designer, but also as a producer to help people get started up. I work with lots of startup companies, but also lots of big established companies. And it's a mix of both entertainment games, which are pretty much what people think of as games, but I distinguish that from serious games, which are games that, well, how many people here have heard the term serious games before this? Ah, great. Well, it's definitely spreading. Just for those of you who haven't, I like to define it as games that have a purpose beyond entertainment. So often they are meant to be entertaining as well, although not necessarily always. Sometimes they're meant to be disturbing, for example. But they may also teach or train. They may try to persuade or do research. There's a whole range of things that these games are used for. Some of the recent things and upcoming things that I've worked on, one of these serious games I worked on was Remission, which was a game from a company called Hope Lab to help teenagers with cancer learn to stick to their treatment regimen, because a lot of the teenagers would go off of their chemotherapy. And happy to say that was a very thoroughly researched, over $3.5 million research project alone based on that game, just to prove that it actually does teach the teenagers why they need to keep taking their chemotherapy drugs even after they have seen the cancer symptoms go away. Matahari is an adventure game that's coming out this fall that I did with Hal Barwood, who I'll be mentioning again in a minute. He was my co-designer on Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, and it's the first time in 15 years we got to work on an adventure game again together. And another serious game that I have coming out later this fall is from Cisco, and it's a game to teach about networking, and brought me back to my roots in that bit twiddling I referred to earlier, as I actually made one segment of the game, one level about binary to decimal conversion, and my friend and I, who are very much of a type, were just laughing at how we were completely geeking out over how much fun we were having reusing these old skills that, you know, were rusty from 25 years of not having to use them. And if you want more information, there's more on my website. It's up here. It's also mentioned in the program. Part of what's happened in my background is that I've done a lot of different things, but there are some common threads. And by starting so early in the games industry, there really were no established previous experts or best practices for how to make video games. And as such, it put a lot of burden on those of us doing that to really trailblaze our own way and figure things out. But we also were lucky enough to work with people who were experts in other fields that had a lot of relevance, everything from paper game design to filmmakers, writers, creative people really in all areas. And I'll mention some of the people that I've really enjoyed working with that have had a big influence on me. But I learned quite a bit, and in particular, a lot of sort of techniques and rules of thumb, guidelines, however you really want to look at it, about coming up with ideas and the brainstorming process. And ultimately, the common thread that a lot of these things have is it's all about engaging your subconscious. And even going back to the first talk this morning, I think you can hear how that is a common thread in a lot of the talks we've had today. So here are some of my favorites, and a lot of these are from my old Lucasfilm, LucasArts days. Excuse me if I use those interchangeably. The company was actually Lucasfilm Games when I started and became LucasArts partway through. First of all, I mentioned Hal Barwood. He was the project leader on Fate of Atlantis, and we co-designed and co-wrote the game. And Hal actually was really interesting because he came from the movie industry and left a successful career where he was a writer on Close Encounters. Even though Steven Spielberg is credited, Hal and Matthew Robbins, his partner, were the ghostwriters on that. And they're the first two torpedo bomber guys off the mothership, giving their name, rank, and serial number right at the end of the movie. Dragon Slayer was my favorite movie that he did before he came to LucasArts, but he basically had a good career, had over half a dozen films that he had co-written or produced or directed that were made into major motion pictures, and we all thought he was nuts to come into games, but that's really what he loved. And when he was on the set at Dragon Slayer, he would be off working on his Apple II on a game he had and not actually working on the movie, and he realized, why not go with what you love, which is obviously a good common piece of advice as well. One of the things he says, though, that I really like is the idea that design is a mysterious process, and you have to find your way through the realm of what's possible, that you can imagine almost anything and you can only do a certain subset of that, and it's really a tortuous process at times. It's partly a conscious activity, but as you'll see with a lot of this, it's really intuitive as well. And for me, that actually it hit me very hard when I was in college, that the place I went to, when you walk into your room, it looks like there's just a huge pile of wood in the center and no furniture, and that actually is your furniture. It's all modular, and you can set it up together and put the edge of the desk on the side of the dresser and the other edge of the desk on some other piece of furniture, but it becomes almost a jigsaw puzzle. And as a game designer, even then, it was in my blood, and I was trying really hard, and the room I had one year was a slightly different size than the standard room, and nothing seemed to fit. All the things I had tried before just weren't working. And I went to sleep that night and had a dream, a fairly innocuous dream, about sitting in my dorm room talking to a friend. And I woke up from the dream with this sense that there was something really important that I was missing. And I'm thinking about the conversation in the dream, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then I realized, well, in the dream, the room was set up. And it was a setup that I had never even contemplated and I hadn't seen. And I'm thinking, and in the dream I knew where every piece of furniture was. My brain had kind of gone through that. And I thought, well, that can't possibly work. It must be at least, a few inches too short here. But I thought, well, why not give it a try? And the tolerances were down to literally a centimeter in some places, but it fit exactly. And it was just such a shock to me that some part of my brain was saying, hey, conscious brain, idiot, do it this way, pay attention. And since then, I've really paid a lot of attention to my subconscious. And